Detective Inspector James Morrison had served the Royal Protection Unit for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would uncover on that cold November morning in 2024. The Westminster Palace was bustling with its usual activity when Morrison received an urgent call from his superior, Commander Sarah Whitfield. "Morrison, we need you at Clarence House immediately." Whitfield's voice crackled through the secure line. "There's been a situation involving missing royal property, and it requires our most experienced investigator." As Morrison made his way through the London streets, his mind raced with possibilities. Royal property theft was rare but not unheard of, and such cases always carried immense political and public relations implications. The royal family's reputation had weathered many storms over the decades, but any scandal involving stolen artifacts could prove devastating. Upon arriving at Clarence House, Morrison was briefed by the head of household, Margaret Thornton, a stern woman in her 60s who had served the royal family for over 3 decades. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of genuine concern as she led Morrison to a private office. "Inspector, we have a delicate situation," Thornton began, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, during a routine inventory of royal jewelry for an upcoming state visit, we discovered that the sapphire tiara of Princess Charlotte, a piece worth approximately £12 million, was missing from the secure vault. Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly. The sapphire tiara was not just any piece of jewelry. It was a historical artifact commissioned by King George IV in 1821 for his daughter, Princess Charlotte, who tragically died in childbirth. The tiara had remained in the royal collection ever since, worn only on the most significant state occasions. "When was it last seen?" Morrison asked, pulling out his notebook. 6 months ago, during the king's coronation ceremony. It was returned to the vault immediately afterward, according to our records. The vault has multiple security layers, including biometric locks, 24-hour surveillance, and armed guards. Only 5 people have access: Their Majesties, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and myself. As Thornton explained the security protocols, Morrison began to understand the gravity of the situation. This wasn't a simple case of misplaced property or even an outside theft. The evidence suggested that someone with the highest level of access had taken the tiara. "Have you spoken to all 5 individuals with vault access?" Morrison inquired. "We've discreetly confirmed with Their Majesties and the Prince and Princess of Wales. All have accounted for their whereabouts, and none report removing the tiara. This leaves us in an extremely delicate position." Morrison spent the next several hours examining the vault, reviewing security footage, and interviewing palace staff. The vault's security system showed no signs of forced entry, and the surveillance footage revealed nothing unusual. However, one detail caught his attention. The security cameras had experienced a brief 30-minute outage exactly 2 weeks prior, attributed to routine maintenance. While reviewing personnel records, Morrison noticed something interesting about Thomas Ashford, a senior royal guard who had worked at various royal residences over the past decade. Ashford's file showed exemplary service, but there were some financial irregularities in his background check from 5 years earlier that had been noted but dismissed due to his outstanding performance record. Morrison decided to interview Ashford discreetly. He found the guard during his afternoon patrol around the grounds of Clarence House. Ashford was a tall, well-built man in his early 40s with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to military discipline. "Guard Ashford, I'm Detective Inspector Morrison with the Royal Protection Unit. I'm investigating a routine security matter and wondered if I could ask you a few questions." Ashford's expression remained professional, but Morrison noticed a slight tenseness in his shoulders. "Of course, Inspector. How can I assist you? Have you noticed anything unusual in the past few weeks? Any changes in routine, unfamiliar faces, or security concerns?" "Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. We maintain strict protocols, and I haven't observed any breaches or suspicious activity." As they spoke, Morrison observed Ashford carefully. The guard answered questions directly but seemed unusually formal, even for royal staff. When Morrison asked about the maintenance period that had caused the camera outage, Ashford's response was technically correct, but lacked the detail Morrison would expect from someone in his position. That evening, Morrison decided to conduct a more thorough investigation into Ashford's background. What he discovered raised several red flags. Ashford had significant gambling debts from several years prior, debts that should have been impossible to pay off on a guard's salary. Yet, according to financial records Morrison was able to access through proper legal channels, the debts had been mysteriously cleared 18 months ago. Furthermore, Morrison discovered that Ashford had requested and received additional training in the palace's security systems, including the vault mechanisms, citing professional development reasons. While such requests weren't unusual, the timing coincided with when Ashford's debts had been cleared. As Morrison dug deeper, he uncovered a web of financial transactions that painted a troubling picture. Ashford had been making regular deposits into an offshore account, small amounts that wouldn't typically trigger financial monitoring systems, but significant enough to suggest a secondary income source. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Morrison received a tip from an anonymous palace employee. The tipster claimed to have seen Ashford in areas of the palace where he shouldn't have been during off-duty hours, specifically near the royal apartments where senior royals kept personal safes. Morrison realized he needed to expand his investigation beyond the missing tiara. If Ashford had access to royal apartments and safes, there might be other missing items that hadn't been discovered yet. The scope of the potential crime was beginning to reveal itself, as far more extensive than initially thought. Working with the palace security team, Morrison quietly arranged for additional surveillance on Ashford while conducting a comprehensive audit of royal property. What they found was staggering. Over the past 18 months, numerous small but valuable items had gone missing from various royal residences. Items so small and seemingly insignificant that their absence hadn't been noticed during routine inventories. The pattern that emerged suggested a sophisticated operation. Someone was systematically removing items, starting with small pieces to test security responses, then gradually escalating to more significant thefts like the sapphire tiara. As Morrison prepared to confront Ashford with this evidence, he received an urgent call from Commander Whitfield. "Morrison, we've had a development. Queen Camilla's private secretary called. They want to report additional missing items from Her Majesty's personal collection. Can you be at her residence within the hour?" The call sent chills down Morrison's spine. If items were missing from Queen Camilla's personal collection, the situation had escalated beyond a simple theft case. The involvement of the Queen Consort meant that the highest levels of the royal family were now directly affected, and the political implications could be catastrophic. As Morrison drove toward Queen Camilla's residence, his mind raced with questions. Was Ashford working alone, or was this part of a larger conspiracy? How had someone managed to access not just the central royal vault, but also the personal collections of senior royals? And most importantly, what other secrets might be uncovered as this investigation deepened? The November evening was growing dark as Morrison arrived at the Queen Consort's residence, unaware that he was about to uncover a secret that would shake the very foundations of the modern British monarchy. What had started as a routine investigation into a missing tiara was about to reveal layers of deception, betrayal, and hidden truths that reached to the highest levels of the royal family. Morrison checked his equipment one more time, ensuring his recording device was functioning properly. Whatever he was about to discover, he needed to document it meticulously. The reputation of the crown itself might depend on how he handled the next few hours of this investigation. As he approached the entrance to Queen Camilla's private residence, Morrison noticed increased security presence. Extra guards were stationed at every entrance, and the usual relaxed atmosphere of the royal household had been replaced with visible tension. Staff members moved quickly and spoke in hushed tones, creating an atmosphere of crisis that Morrison had rarely experienced in his years of royal service. The Queen Consort's private secretary, Elizabeth Hartwell, met Morrison at the entrance. Hartwell was known for her discretion and professionalism, having served in various royal households for over 20 years. Her worried expression immediately told Morrison that whatever they had discovered was serious enough to warrant the highest level of concern. "Inspector Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly," Hartwell began as she led him through the ornate hallways. "What we've discovered requires the utmost sensitivity. Her Majesty is aware of your investigation and has given permission for you to examine her private study and safe." As they walked, Hartwell explained the circumstances of their discovery. "This morning, Her Majesty asked me to retrieve a particular necklace from her personal safe for an upcoming engagement. When I opened the safe, I immediately noticed that several items seemed to be missing or displaced. Her Majesty confirmed that multiple pieces from her personal collection were no longer there. Morrison's pulse quickened. How many pieces are we talking about, and what type of items? At least 6 significant pieces, including a diamond bracelet given to Her Majesty by the King, several antique brooches with historical significance, and most concerning of all, some personal documents that were stored in the same safe. The mention of personal documents added an entirely new dimension to the case. Morrison realized he might be dealing with more than theft. This could potentially involve blackmail, espionage, or other crimes with national security implications. When they reached Queen Camilla's private study, Morrison was struck by the elegance and personal nature of the space. Unlike the formal public rooms of royal residences, this room reflected the Queen Consort's personal taste and contained numerous family photographs, personal books, and mementos from her life before and during her marriage to the king. The safe was built into the wall behind an oil painting and was significantly more sophisticated than Morrison had expected. It required both a numerical code and biometric verification to open, making unauthorized access extremely difficult for anyone without the Queen Consort's direct cooperation or advanced criminal expertise. Who has access to this safe? Morrison asked while examining the lock mechanism. Only Her Majesty herself. Not even I have the combination or biometric access. That's what makes this so puzzling and concerning. As Morrison continued his examination, he noticed something unusual about the safe's position. The wall around it showed slight scratches and marks that suggested recent activity, possibly indicating that someone had attempted to access or manipulate the safe's external components. Miss Hartwell, I need to ask some difficult questions. Has Her Majesty noticed anyone showing unusual interest in her private quarters or personal belongings? Any staff members, visitors, or even family members who might have had access to this area? Hartwell hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of the question. Inspector, I must stress that Her Majesty maintains the highest standards of trust with her staff and family. However, there have been a few occasions recently where individuals have been in this area who don't typically have access. Can you be more specific? 3 weeks ago, there was a minor water leak in the adjoining room that required emergency repairs. Several maintenance workers were in and out of this area over a 2-day period. Additionally, there was a security system upgrade last month that required technicians to access various rooms throughout the residence. Morrison made careful notes of these details. The timeline was beginning to align with other aspects of his investigation, particularly the period when the security cameras had experienced their outage at Clarence House. I'll need a complete list of everyone who had access during those periods, including background checks and current employment status, Morrison stated. As Hartwell began gathering the requested information, Morrison's attention was drawn to a small detail on the safe's door. There were microscopic metal filings around the lock mechanism, barely visible but clearly indicative of someone attempting to manipulate the lock. This was no amateur operation. Whoever had accessed this safe possessed sophisticated lock-picking skills or specialized equipment. Morrison's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his forensics team at Clarence House. They had discovered fingerprints on the original vault that didn't match any of the authorized personnel. More importantly, those same fingerprints had been found on several other surfaces throughout various royal residences, suggesting a systematic pattern of unauthorized access. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but Morrison realized he was still missing crucial information. The sophistication of the operation suggested professional criminals, yet the intimate knowledge of royal routines and security protocols pointed to someone with inside access. It was possible they were dealing with a combination of both, an inside person providing information to outside criminals. As the evening progressed, Morrison's investigation took on increasing urgency. He coordinated with multiple teams simultaneously. Forensics experts analyzing physical evidence, financial investigators tracing money flows, and intelligence analysts looking for potential connections to known criminal organizations. The breakthrough came near midnight, when Morrison received a call from the financial investigation team. They had discovered a series of encrypted communications between an unknown party and several international buyers of stolen luxury goods. The communications referenced specific items that matched descriptions of the missing royal pieces, including the sapphire tiara. More shocking still, the communications mentioned a final acquisition scheduled for the following week. suggesting that whoever was behind the thefts was planning one more significant score before disappearing permanently. Morrison realized that time was running out. If the criminals were planning to complete their operation and disappear, he needed to identify and apprehend them immediately. The investigation had evolved from a simple theft case into a race against time to prevent what could be the largest theft of royal property in modern British history. As he prepared for what he sensed would be the climactic phase of the investigation, Morrison reflected on how much the case had already revealed. The careful planning, the inside knowledge, and the sophisticated execution all pointed to a criminal operation that had been months or even years in the making. What Morrison didn't yet realize was that the most shocking revelations were still to come. The next phase of his investigation would uncover not just the identity of the criminals, but secrets about the royal family itself that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the people he had sworn to protect. The clock was ticking, and Morrison knew that the next 24 hours would determine not just the success of his investigation, but potentially the future reputation of the British monarchy itself. The following morning brought no relief to Detective Inspector Morrison's mounting concerns. As dawn broke over London, he found himself coordinating the largest internal investigation the Royal Protection Unit had conducted in decades. The secure operations room at Scotland Yard had been transformed into a command center, with multiple screens displaying security footage, financial records, and a growing web of connections that painted an increasingly complex picture. Commander Sarah Whitfield arrived early, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress that had kept her awake most of the night. "Morrison, brief me on where we stand," she said, accepting a cup of coffee from one of the junior officers. Morrison pointed to the main display board, where photos, documents, and timeline markers created a visual representation of their investigation. "Ma'am, we're dealing with something far more sophisticated than we initially thought. The fingerprint analysis has connected Thomas Ashford to at least 7 different crime scenes across 4 royal residences over the past 18 months. 7 scenes? I thought we were looking at missing items from 2 locations." "That's what we thought initially, but our expanded investigation has revealed systematic theft from Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Clarence House, and now Queen Camilla's private residence. Each theft was carefully planned to avoid detection during routine inventories." Morrison gestured to a financial chart displayed on one of the monitors. The money trail is equally revealing. Ashford has been receiving payments totaling over £300,000 over the past 18 months, all from offshore accounts linked to known international art and jewelry fencing operations. "This isn't just theft, Morrison. This is systematic plundering of the royal collection. How much have we lost in total? Conservative estimates put the value at over £30 million, but that's just the monetary value. Some of these items are historically irreplaceable. The sapphire tiara alone represents centuries of royal heritage." As Morrison continued his briefing, Detective Sergeant Lisa Chen entered the room with a file folder that she handed directly to Morrison. "Sir, you need to see this immediately. Our investigation into Ashford's background has uncovered something significant." Morrison opened the folder and felt his stomach drop. Inside were copies of documents that revealed Thomas Ashford wasn't just a corrupt royal guard. He was connected to a much larger criminal network with international connections. Birth records showed that Ashford's real name was Thomas Kovac, and he had connections to organized crime families in Eastern Europe. "How did this man pass our security clearance?" Whitfield demanded, her voice rising with anger. "It appears his identity was carefully constructed over many years," Chen explained. "The real Thomas Ashford died in a car accident 15 years ago. Someone took his identity and created a completely fabricated background, complete with military service records, references, and educational credentials." Morrison felt a chill as the implications became clear. "This means we're not dealing with a guard who turned criminal. We're dealing with a career criminal who infiltrated the royal household as part of a long-term operation." The revelation transformed their entire understanding of the case. This wasn't opportunistic theft by a financially desperate employee. It was a sophisticated intelligence operation that had taken years to plan and execute. The criminals had invested considerable time and resources into placing someone inside the royal security apparatus. "We need to assume that everything Ashford has had access to over his years of service has been compromised," Morrison stated grimly. Security protocols, family schedules, personal habits, travel plans, all of it could have been passed to his handlers. Whitfield began pacing the room, her mind racing through the security implications. Morrison, if they've had access to that level of information for years, why only start stealing items 18 months ago? What changed? It was a crucial question that Morrison had been pondering himself. I believe something triggered the operational phase of their plan. Perhaps they received orders from higher up in the organization, or maybe they decided the intelligence-gathering phase was complete and it was time to move to the profit-making phase. Chen interrupted with another urgent discovery. Sir, I've been analyzing the communication intercepts from last night. The encrypted messages mention something called Operation Crown Jewel and reference a timeline that ends this weekend. Morrison felt his blood pressure spike. This weekend? That's only 3 days away. What specifically do the messages say? They're heavily coded, but our cryptanalysis team has identified references to a final collection event and mentions of transportation arrangements for Saturday night. There are also references to what appears to be auction arrangements with international buyers. The pieces were falling into place in Morrison's mind. They're planning one final major theft, and then they'll disappear with everything they've stolen over the past 18 months. Saturday night must be when they plan to take their biggest target. What could be bigger than what they've already stolen? Whitfield asked. Morrison considered the question carefully. The crown jewels themselves are too well protected and monitored. But there are other items of enormous value and historical significance that might be more accessible during certain events or ceremonies. As the team worked to decode more of the intercepted communications, Morrison received an urgent call from the palace. Queen Camilla's private secretary was requesting an immediate meeting to discuss new developments in their investigation of the missing items from Her Majesty's safe. When Morrison arrived at Queen Camilla's residence, Elizabeth Hartwell met him with an expression of deep concern. Inspector, Her Majesty has been reviewing the contents of her safe more carefully, and she's discovered something extremely troubling. Hartwell led Morrison to the Queen Consort's private study, where Morrison noticed that the safe was open and several items were laid out on the desk. Queen Camilla herself was present, which surprised Morrison as he hadn't expected to speak directly with her. Inspector Morrison, Queen Camilla began, her voice carrying the weight of genuine distress. What I'm about to share with you must be handled with the utmost discretion. Among the items taken from my safe were personal documents that could be extremely damaging if they fell into the wrong hands. Morrison nodded respectfully. Your Majesty, can you tell me the nature of these documents? They include personal correspondence from family members, including letters that contain private family information that was never intended for public consumption. More concerning are documents related to certain financial arrangements and historical matters that could be misinterpreted or used maliciously. The Queen Consort paused, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Inspector, there is one document in particular that concerns me greatly. It's a letter written by my late mother-in-law, Princess Charlotte, shortly before her death. The letter contains information about certain family matters that, if made public, could cause significant embarrassment to the royal family. Morrison felt a chill at the mention of Princess Charlotte. The name connected directly to the stolen sapphire tiara, which had originally belonged to her. Your Majesty, could these documents be used for blackmail purposes? That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Inspector. The combination of valuable stolen property and sensitive personal documents could be used to extort significant sums of money or to damage the reputation of the monarchy itself. As Morrison processed this information, he realized the true scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just theft. It was a comprehensive attack on the royal family that combined financial crime with potential blackmail and reputational damage. Your Majesty, I need to ask about the security of your safe. You mentioned that only you have access, but given what we've discovered about the sophistication of this criminal operation, is it possible that your safe could have been accessed through technological means? Inspector, I must tell you something that I hadn't mentioned before. About 6 weeks ago, I discovered that items in my safe had been moved slightly. At the time, I thought perhaps I had simply forgotten how I had arranged them, but now I wonder if someone had been accessing the safe. Morrison's mind raced with the implications. Did you change your access codes after noticing the displacement? No, I didn't think it was significant enough at the time. In hindsight, that may have been a mistake. Morrison realized they were dealing with criminals who possessed not only physical access to royal residences, but also the technical capability to overcome sophisticated security measures. The scope of the operation suggested resources and expertise that went far beyond typical criminal activity. As Morrison prepared to leave Queen Camilla's residence, Hartwell approached him privately. "Inspector, there's something else Her Majesty asked me to tell you." The letter from Princess Charlotte that was mentioned. It wasn't just stored in the safe. Her Majesty had been planning to include it in a forthcoming book about royal family history. Its theft could derail that entire project. "What makes this letter so significant?" Morrison asked. "It contains Princess Charlotte's personal account of certain events during her father's reign that contradict some accepted historical narratives. The letter reveals family secrets that have been carefully guarded for over 2 centuries. Morrison understood that they were now dealing with historical documents that could reshape public understanding of royal history. The criminals hadn't just stolen valuable objects, they had taken pieces of British heritage that belonged to the nation itself. Returning to Scotland Yard, Morrison found his team had made significant progress in tracking the criminal network. Detective Sergeant Chen had identified multiple international connections, including links to criminal organizations in Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia. The operation appeared to be orchestrated by a sophisticated syndicate that specialized in high-value cultural property theft. "Sir, we've also identified the likely location where Ashford has been meeting his handlers," Chen reported. "Surveillance footage from around London shows him making regular visits to a warehouse complex in East London. The facility is registered to a shipping company that we believe is a front operation." Morrison studied the surveillance photos, noting the timing and frequency of Ashford's visits. "It appears he's been making deliveries every 2 weeks, probably handing over stolen items and receiving his payments. There's more, sir. We've discovered that this same warehouse has been used to ship artwork and antiques to buyers across Europe. Our international colleagues have confirmed that several high-profile cultural thefts in other countries have been traced back to items that passed through this facility." The revelation that they were dealing with an international criminal syndicate changed everything. Morrison realized they would need to coordinate with law enforcement agencies across multiple countries, and that the investigation had implications far beyond British borders. As evening approached, Morrison received an encrypted message that made his blood run cold. Intelligence sources had intercepted communications, indicating that the criminal network was aware of the police investigation and was accelerating their timeline. Operation Crown Jewel was being moved up from Saturday to Friday night, less than 24 hours away. Morrison immediately contacted Commander Whitfield and requested emergency authorization for a full-scale surveillance operation. They needed to identify the target of the final theft and position themselves to intercept the criminals in the act. "Morrison, what do you think their final target will be?" Whitfield asked during their emergency briefing. Morrison had been considering this question all day. "Given the pattern of their previous thefts and the intelligence we've gathered, I believe they're planning to target something during tomorrow night's state dinner at Buckingham Palace. The combination of valuable items on display and the distraction of the formal event would provide the perfect opportunity. But security for state dinners is at maximum level. How could they possibly gain access? They have Ashford, who has legitimate access to the palace and knows all the security protocols. Plus, they've had 18 months to plan this operation. They've probably identified weaknesses in our security that we're not even aware of." As Morrison outlined his theory, he realized that stopping Operation Crown Jewel would require perfect coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. They would have only one chance to catch the criminals in the act, and failure would mean losing not only millions of pounds in stolen royal property, but also potentially compromising sensitive historical documents that could damage the monarchy's reputation. The clock was ticking, and Morrison knew that the next 24 hours would determine whether they could prevent the largest theft in royal history, or whether the criminals would escape with treasures that belonged to the British people. What Morrison didn't yet know was that the final phase of Operation Crown Jewel involved more than just theft. The criminals had spent months planning something that would not only enrich them financially, but also expose royal family secrets that had been hidden for generations. The documents stolen from Queen Camilla's safe were just the beginning of a revelation that would shake the monarchy to its very foundations. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to permeate Scotland Yard's operations center. Detective Inspector Morrison had barely slept, spending the night coordinating with international law enforcement agencies and finalizing surveillance plans for what they now knew would be the climactic confrontation with the criminal syndicate behind Operation Crown Jewel. The state dinner scheduled for that evening at Buckingham Palace was intended to honor visiting dignitaries from several Commonwealth nations. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a magnificent display of British hospitality and royal tradition. Now, it had become the backdrop for what could be the most audacious theft in modern history. Commander Sarah Whitfield entered the operations room carrying a stack of intelligence reports from various agencies. "Morrison, we've received cooperation from Interpol, and they've confirmed our worst fears. The syndicate behind this operation has been linked to major cultural property thefts across Europe over the past 5 years. Their estimated total take is over £200 million. Morrison studied the international reports with growing concern. "They're not just common criminals, ma'am. They're running a sophisticated operation that targets cultural institutions and wealthy private collectors. The royal family has been their most ambitious target yet." "What's our current status on Thomas Ashford?" Whitfield inquired. Detective Sergeant Chen looked up from her computer terminal. "Sir, surveillance teams have maintained discreet observation since yesterday evening. Ashford reported for his regular shift this morning and appears to be following normal protocols, but our behavioral analysts note increased signs of stress and heightened alertness." Morrison nodded grimly. "He knows tonight is the endgame. The question is whether he's planning to participate in the final theft or if he's preparing to disappear before we can arrest him." The investigation had revealed that Ashford's role was far more complex than initially suspected. Beyond providing inside access and intelligence about royal security protocols, he had been instrumental in planning the timing and execution of each theft. His intimate knowledge of palace routines, staff schedules, and family movements had made the entire operation possible. "Sir, we've also discovered something troubling about tonight's state dinner," Chen continued. "Ashford requested to be assigned to the security detail for the event, citing his experience with high-profile functions. The request was approved before we identified him as a suspect." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. That means he'll have legitimate access to areas of the palace that would normally be off-limits during such events. We need to assume he's planning to use that access for the final phase of their operation. As the morning progressed, Morrison's team worked frantically to identify what the criminals might be targeting during the state dinner. The palace would be displaying numerous valuable items for the event, including historical artifacts, ceremonial silverware, and jewelry that would be worn by members of the royal family. The breakthrough came when Morrison received a call from Queen Camilla's private secretary, Elizabeth Hartwell. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately caught Morrison's attention. "Inspector, Her Majesty has remembered something important about the documents stolen from her safe. Among the papers taken was a detailed inventory of jewelry and artifacts that are only displayed during state occasions. The inventory includes security codes and storage locations that would be invaluable to anyone planning a theft." Morrison's blood ran cold. "Hartwell, does this inventory include items that will be on display tonight?" "Yes, Inspector. It specifically details the ceremonial pieces that are brought out for Commonwealth state dinners, including several items that have never been publicly photographed and whose existence is known only to senior royal household staff." Morrison realized that the criminals had been planning this operation with military precision. They hadn't just stolen random valuable items, they had stolen the very intelligence they needed to execute the perfect crime. "Ms. Hartwell, I need you to work with palace security to immediately change any access codes or storage locations listed in that inventory. We have to assume the criminals have had access to that information for weeks." As Morrison coordinated with palace security, he received an urgent message from his surveillance team. Ashford had been observed making a brief phone call during his lunch break, and the communication pattern suggested he was confirming final arrangements with his criminal contacts. Morrison's team intercepted fragments of the conversation, but the portions they could decode were chilling. References to Final Collection and Charlotte's Legacy confirmed that the criminals were indeed planning to strike during the state dinner, and their target was somehow connected to Princess Charlotte, the original owner of the stolen sapphire tiara. "Sir," Chen called out from her workstation, I've been analyzing the historical connection between Princess Charlotte and tonight's state dinner. According to palace records, one of the ceremonial pieces being displayed tonight is the Charlotte Memorial Set, a collection of jewelry and artifacts created to honor Princess Charlotte after her death. Morrison studied the documentation Chen had assembled. The Charlotte Memorial Set included not only valuable jewelry, but also historical documents and personal effects that had been preserved as part of the royal collection. If the criminals were targeting this collection, they were attempting to steal pieces of British history that were literally irreplaceable. "What's the monetary value of the Charlotte Memorial Set?" Morrison asked. "Conservative estimates put it at over £50 million, but the historical value is incalculable. Some of these items are the only remaining personal effects of Princess Charlotte, and they provide unique insights into royal life in the early 19th century. Morrison realized that stopping this theft was about more than protecting valuable property. It was about preserving British heritage for future generations. The criminals weren't just stealing from the royal family. They were stealing from the entire nation. As afternoon approached, Morrison's team finalized their surveillance and intervention plans. They had identified 3 critical points during the state dinner when the criminals might attempt to access the Charlotte Memorial Set. During the pre-dinner reception, when security attention would be focused on guest protection. During the dinner itself, when staff would be occupied with service. And during the post-dinner entertainment, when movement throughout the palace would be at its highest. Morrison positioned his team strategically throughout Buckingham Palace, coordinating with existing security personnel while trying to maintain the appearance of normal operations. The challenge was enormous. They needed to protect against a sophisticated criminal operation while ensuring that the state dinner proceeded without disruption. At 4 p.m., Morrison received intelligence that changed everything. Surveillance teams had observed multiple suspicious vehicles arriving at the East London warehouse that served as the criminals' operational base. Analysis of license plates and passenger manifests revealed that international members of the syndicate had arrived in London, suggesting that Operation Crown Jewel was indeed intended to be their final and most ambitious theft. "Morrison," Commander Whitfield's voice crackled through his earpiece. "We've just received word from customs authorities. A private jet registered to a shell company landed at a private airfield outside London this morning. Passenger manifests show individuals with known connections to international art theft operations." Morrison understood the implications immediately. They're not planning to fence the stolen items through normal channels. They have buyers waiting, probably planning to transport everything out of the country immediately after the theft. The revelation added urgency to their mission. If the criminals succeeded in removing the stolen items from British soil, recovering them would become exponentially more difficult. International law enforcement cooperation, while excellent, had limitations when dealing with organized crime syndicates operating across multiple jurisdictions. At 5:30 p.m., as the first guests began arriving for the state dinner, Morrison took his position in the palace's security command center. Multiple screens displayed feeds from cameras throughout the building, and radio communications buzzed with updates from teams positioned at every critical location. Morrison watched as Thomas Ashford reported to his assigned station near the state dining room. The guard's behavior appeared normal to casual observers, but Morrison could see subtle signs of tension and anticipation that confirmed their intelligence about the planned operation. "All units, this is Control." Morrison spoke into his microphone. "Target 1 is in position and showing signs of operational readiness. Maintain observation protocols and prepare for possible action." As the state dinner commenced, Morrison tracked the movements of both legitimate guests and potential threats. The Charlotte Memorial Set was displayed in the adjacent blue drawing room, where selected guests could view the historical artifacts during designated periods of the evening. At 7:45 p.m., Morrison's carefully laid plans faced their first test. Ashford had moved from his assigned position and was approaching the blue drawing room during a period when guest access was temporarily restricted. Security cameras tracked his movement as he used his legitimate access credentials to enter the restricted area. "All units, Target 1 is making his move," Morrison announced. "Teams 2 and 3 prepare for possible intervention, but maintain distance until we confirm criminal activity." Morrison watched the security feed as Ashford entered the blue drawing room and approached the display case containing the Charlotte Memorial Set. The guard's movements were deliberate and practiced, suggesting he had rehearsed this operation multiple times. What Morrison witnessed next confirmed all their worst fears about the sophistication of the criminal operation. Ashford produced a small electronic device that he connected to the display case's security system. Within minutes, the case's alarms were disabled, and Ashford was able to access the contents without triggering any security alerts. Control to all units. We have confirmation of criminal activity. Target 1 is actively stealing items from the Charlotte Memorial set. Prepare for immediate intervention. Morrison watched as Ashford carefully removed several small but extremely valuable items from the display case, including jewelry pieces and what appeared to be documents. The guard's training in security protocols was now being used against the very institution he had sworn to protect. But as Morrison prepared to order his teams to move in for the arrest, something unexpected happened. Ashford's communication device activated, and Morrison could hear urgent voices speaking in what sounded like Eastern European languages. The tone and urgency of the communication suggested that something had gone wrong with their plan. Morrison realized that the criminal syndicate had discovered their surveillance operation and was attempting to abort the mission. But Ashford, already committed to the theft and presumably under significant pressure from his criminal handlers, continued removing items from the display case. "Sir!" Chen's voice came through Morrison's earpiece. "We're detecting multiple vehicles moving rapidly toward the palace from the direction of the East London warehouse. It appears the syndicate is sending reinforcements or an extraction team." Morrison's mind raced as he considered their options. They could arrest Ashford immediately and secure the stolen items, but that would allow the larger criminal network to escape. Alternatively, they could allow the operation to continue and attempt to capture the entire syndicate when they tried to extract Ashford and the stolen property. The decision was made for them when palace security detected unauthorized vehicles attempting to breach the palace perimeter. The criminal syndicate had apparently decided that extracting their stolen property was worth the risk of a direct confrontation with law enforcement. "All units, this is Control," Morrison announced. "We have multiple threats converging on the palace. Initiate full security protocols and prepare for possible hostile action. The safety of guests and royal family members is our absolute priority." As alarms began sounding throughout Buckingham Palace, Morrison realized that Operation Crown Jewel had evolved from a sophisticated theft into a potential siege situation. The criminals were no longer content to steal quietly and disappear. They were prepared to use force to complete their mission. Morrison's worst fears were about to be realized, as the confrontation he had been dreading was about to unfold in one of the most secure buildings in Britain. The next hour would determine not only whether they could stop the largest theft in royal history, but also whether they could protect the safety of everyone inside Buckingham Palace. What Morrison didn't yet know was that the criminals' true target wasn't just the Charlotte Memorial set, but a specific document hidden within it that contained secrets about the royal family that were far more valuable than any jewels or artifacts. The final phase of Operation Crown Jewel was about to reveal truths that had been buried for over 2 centuries. The security alarms that echoed through Buckingham Palace at 8:15 p.m. on that Friday evening marked the beginning of the most intense law enforcement operation in the building's modern history. Detective Inspector Morrison found himself coordinating a response to what had rapidly evolved from a theft investigation into a full-scale security crisis involving international criminals, stolen royal treasures, and the safety of dozens of high-profile government officials. Morrison's position in the Security Command Center provided him with a comprehensive view of the rapidly developing situation. It's about history. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from cameras throughout the palace, while radio communications buzzed with updates from teams responding to various threats simultaneously. "Control! This is Perimeter Team Alpha," came the urgent voice through Morrison's headset. "We have visual confirmation of 3 vehicles attempting to breach the main gates. Occupants appear to be armed and are using electronic equipment to override security systems." Morrison's mind raced as he processed the implications. The criminal syndicate wasn't attempting a subtle extraction of their operative and stolen goods. They were mounting what amounted to a military-style assault on one of Britain's most secure locations. "All units, implement Protocol 7 immediately," Morrison commanded. Protocol 7 was the highest-level security response, reserved for terrorist attacks or other extreme threats to royal safety. It involved immediately securing all members of the royal family in protected locations while mobilizing specialized armed response units. Inside the blue drawing room, Thomas Ashford continued his theft of the Charlotte Memorial set, apparently unaware that his criminal associates had abandoned subtlety in favor of a direct assault. Security cameras showed him methodically removing items from the display case, paying particular attention to an ornate wooden box that had been part of Princess Charlotte's personal effects. Morrison watched with growing alarm as Ashford opened the wooden box and removed what appeared to be a letter or document. The guard's body language suggested intense satisfaction, as if he had found exactly what he was looking for among the historical artifacts. "Sir?" Detective Sergeant Chen's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Facial recognition software has identified the individuals in the assault vehicles. They're known associates of the Moldovan crime family that specializes in high-value cultural property theft. We're dealing with professional criminals with military training." Morrison felt his blood pressure spike. The Moldovan syndicate was known for their willingness to use violence and their sophisticated operational planning. Their involvement confirmed that Operation Crown Jewel was far more than a simple theft. It was a coordinated attack by an international criminal organization. "Chen, coordinate with armed response units and ensure they understand we're dealing with potentially lethal force," Morrison ordered. Palace security is trained for many scenarios, but not necessarily for this level of criminal assault. As Morrison coordinated the security response, he maintained visual contact with Ashford through the security camera feeds. The corrupt guard had completed his theft and was now moving through the palace corridors, apparently heading toward a predetermined extraction point. Morrison's team had anticipated this possibility and had positioned plainclothes officers throughout the palace to intercept Ashford if he attempted to leave his assigned area. However, the guard's intimate knowledge of palace layout and security protocols was proving problematic. He was using service corridors and back passages that would allow him to avoid most security checkpoints. "Control, this is Surveillance Team 3, came an urgent transmission. Target 1 is moving toward the North Wing service entrance. We have units in position, but he's using access routes that would be difficult to monitor under normal circumstances." Morrison realized that Ashford's years of service in the palace had given him an enormous advantage in executing his escape plan. The guard knew every secret passage, service entrance, and security blind spot in the building. "All teams converging on North Wing," Morrison announced. "Approach with extreme caution. Target 1 should be considered armed and dangerous, and we need to recover stolen historical artifacts that are irreplaceable." At 8:30 p.m., the situation escalated dramatically when the criminal assault team successfully breached the palace perimeter. Explosions echoed through the building as the criminals used sophisticated electronic equipment to disable security systems and create chaos that would mask their extraction operation. Morrison watched security feeds showing armed individuals moving through areas of the palace that should have been completely secure. Their movements were coordinated and professional, suggesting extensive reconnaissance and planning that had gone undetected for months. "Sir, we have confirmation that the royal family has been successfully evacuated to secure locations," Chen reported. "All state dinner guests have been moved to protected areas, and palace staff are implementing emergency protocols." Morrison felt some relief knowing that the immediate threat to human life had been minimized. But the criminals' objectives remained unclear. Were they simply trying to extract Ashford and the stolen items, or did they have additional targets within the palace? The answer became clear when Morrison received intelligence from teams monitoring the criminals' communications. Intercepted radio transmissions revealed that the assault team was specifically searching for Queen Camilla's private quarters, apparently seeking additional items that they believed to be stored there. "Control, this is Intelligence Team," came the urgent transmission. Intercepted communications indicate the assault team has intelligence about additional valuable items in Queen Camilla's private safe. They appear to be attempting a secondary theft operation while using the primary assault as distraction. Morrison's understanding of the criminal operation shifted again. This wasn't just about extracting Ashford and the items he had stolen from the Charlotte Memorial set. The criminals were attempting to complete their theft of Queen Camilla's personal collection during the chaos of their assault. "All available units converge on Queen Camilla's private quarters," Morrison ordered. We cannot allow these criminals to access additional royal property, and we need to prevent them from obtaining whatever documents they're specifically seeking. As Morrison coordinated the response to multiple simultaneous threats, he received an update that chilled him to the bone. Advanced forensic analysis of the communications intercepts had revealed that the criminals weren't just seeking valuable objects. They were specifically targeting documents that contained sensitive historical information about the royal family. The wooden box that Ashford had taken from the Charlotte Memorial set apparently contained correspondence and documents that the criminals believed would be extremely valuable to certain international buyers who collected compromising information about prominent families and government officials. Morrison realized they were dealing with more than theft. They were confronting an operation that combined criminal profit motives with potential blackmail and political espionage. The documents stolen from Queen Camilla's safe, combined with historical papers taken from the Charlotte Memorial set, could provide ammunition for those seeking to damage the reputation of the British monarchy. At 8:45 p.m., Morrison's teams achieved their first major success when they successfully cornered Thomas Ashford in the North Wing service area. The corrupt guard was found in possession of multiple stolen items, including the ornate wooden box from Princess Charlotte's collection. "Control, this is Apprehension Team 1, came the triumphant radio transmission. "We have Target 1 in custody, with multiple stolen items recovered. However, the subject is refusing to cooperate and is demanding to speak with a lawyer before providing any information about his associates." Morrison felt satisfaction at Ashford's capture, but he knew the operation was far from over. The assault team was still active within the palace, and their objectives remained partially unfulfilled. Maintain security around the apprehension site, and ensure all recovered items are immediately secured, Morrison ordered. "We need detailed documentation of everything recovered from Target 1. As Morrison's teams processed Ashford's arrest, the criminal assault team made their final desperate attempt to complete their mission. Security cameras showed them forcing their way into Queen Camilla's private quarters, using sophisticated lock-picking equipment to access her personal safe. Morrison watched the security feed with growing alarm as the criminals demonstrated the same advanced technical capabilities that had allowed them to access secure areas throughout their months-long theft operation. These weren't opportunistic thieves. They were professionals with access to military-grade equipment and training. "Control, this is Response Team Alpha," came an urgent transmission. "We have visual contact with the assault team in Queen Camilla's quarters. They appear to be attempting to access the private safe that was previously compromised." Morrison made the critical decision to authorize an immediate tactical response. "All units, you are authorized to use necessary force to prevent further theft and to protect royal property. These criminals have demonstrated their willingness to use violence, and we cannot allow them to complete their mission." The confrontation that followed would be remembered as one of the most intense law enforcement actions ever conducted within a royal residence. Armed response teams engaged the criminal assault team in Queen Camilla's private quarters, resulting in a firefight that echoed through the historic corridors of Buckingham Palace. Morrison monitored the tactical response while coordinating with medical teams and ensuring that the recovered stolen items were properly secured. The professional nature of the criminals' operation became even more apparent during the confrontation, as they demonstrated advanced combat training and sophisticated equipment. When the engagement finally ended at 9:20 p.m., 3 members of the criminal assault team had been captured, while 2 others had been killed during the firefight. More importantly, Morrison's teams had prevented the criminals from accessing Queen Camilla's safe and had recovered additional stolen items that the assault team had been carrying. "Control, this is Response Team Alpha," came the final transmission from the tactical units. "Area is secure, all threats neutralized. We have recovered multiple bags containing what appears to be stolen jewelry and documents. Medical teams are treating minor injuries to our personnel." Morrison felt exhaustion wash over him as the immediate crisis passed, but he knew that the investigation was entering a new phase. They had successfully prevented the completion of Operation Crown Jewel and had apprehended most of the criminals involved, but the full scope of what had been stolen over the previous 18 months was still being determined. As crime scene teams began processing the evidence and interviewing the captured criminals, Morrison received a call from Commander Whitfield that would change his understanding of everything they had just experienced. "Morrison, you need to return to headquarters immediately. Whitfield's voice was tense with barely controlled excitement. Our forensic teams have made some discoveries about the documents recovered from Ashford that you need to see personally. What we've found changes everything we thought we knew about this case. Morrison left the palace as dawn was breaking over London, unaware that the most shocking revelations about Operation Crown Jewel were still to come. The documents recovered from the criminals would reveal secrets about the royal family that had been hidden for over 2 centuries. Secrets that would transform a theft investigation into one of the most significant discoveries in British royal history. The wooden box that Thomas Ashford had stolen from Princess Charlotte's collection contained more than historical curiosities. It contained truths about the royal lineage that would challenge fundamental assumptions about the monarchy itself. What Morrison and his team had prevented wasn't just the largest theft in royal history. They had unknowingly protected secrets that could have reshaped the entire British constitutional system. As Morrison drove through the London streets, he reflected on the intensity of the previous 24 hours. They had successfully protected the royal family and prevented international criminals from completing their ambitious theft operation. But the investigation had also revealed vulnerabilities in royal security that would require comprehensive reforms and had exposed the royal household to types of threats they had never previously considered. What Morrison didn't yet realize was that the documents they had recovered would reveal that the criminals' true objective hadn't been financial profit at all, but rather the acquisition of historical evidence that certain powerful individuals had been willing to pay enormous sums to obtain. The next phase of the investigation would uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond common theft, into the realm of international intrigue and historical manipulation. Detective Inspector Morrison arrived at Scotland Yard as the first light of Saturday morning illuminated London's skyline. The events of the previous evening at Buckingham Palace had left him physically exhausted but mentally alert, knowing that the most crucial phase of the investigation was just beginning. Commander Sarah Whitfield met him at the entrance, her expression carrying a gravity that immediately put Morrison on edge. "Morrison, what our forensic teams have discovered in those recovered documents changes everything," Whitfield began as they walked toward the secure examination room. "We're not just dealing with theft anymore. We've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that reaches back centuries and involves some of the most powerful people in Europe." Morrison followed Whitfield into a specialized facility where historical documents were examined using advanced forensic techniques. Several experts were already at work, carefully analyzing papers and artifacts recovered from Thomas Ashford and the assault team that had attacked Buckingham Palace. Margaret Sinclair, the Royal Archives chief historian, looked up from her examination table with an expression of profound amazement. "Inspector Morrison, in 30 years of working with royal historical documents, I have never encountered anything as significant as what we recovered last night." Morrison approached the examination table where several documents were laid out under protective glass. Even to his untrained eye, the papers appeared to be genuinely historical, with the aged parchment and period ink that would be extremely difficult to forge convincingly. "Dr. Sinclair, can you tell me what makes these documents so significant?" Morrison asked. "Inspector, what we have here is correspondence between Princess Charlotte and her father, King George IV, written just weeks before her tragic death in 1817. But it's not the age or royal provenance that makes these documents extraordinary. It's their content." Dr. Sinclair gestured to a particular letter that had been carefully unfolded and placed under magnification equipment. "This letter from Princess Charlotte contains detailed information about irregularities in the royal succession that she had discovered through her own investigation into family genealogical records." Morrison felt a chill as he began to understand the implications. "Are you saying these documents contain information that could affect the legitimacy of the current royal lineage?" Princess Charlotte had discovered evidence that certain marriages and births in the royal family during the 18th and early 19th centuries were not as officially recorded. More specifically, she found evidence of secret marriages and unrecognized children that could significantly alter the line of succession. Morrison's mind raced as he considered the explosive nature of such revelations. "Sinclair, are you certain these documents are authentic? Given the circumstances of their recovery, we need to be absolutely sure we're not dealing with sophisticated forgeries. Inspector, I've subjected these documents to every authentication test available to modern forensic science. Carbon dating, ink analysis, paper composition, handwriting verification. Everything confirms that these letters are genuine 19th century documents written by Princess Charlotte herself. Commander Whitfield interrupted the historical discussion with urgent law enforcement concerns. Morrison, we've also discovered that the criminal syndicate behind Operation Crown Jewel wasn't working alone. Intercepted communications revealed that they were hired by a consortium of wealthy private collectors and political figures who wanted these specific documents. Morrison turned his attention to the intelligence reports that Whitfield had brought. Ma'am, are you telling me that this entire theft operation was commissioned specifically to obtain historical documents rather than valuable jewelry? The stolen jewelry and artifacts were essentially camouflage for their real objective. Our investigation has revealed payments totaling over £10 million from anonymous Swiss bank accounts to fund this operation, far more than could be justified by the monetary value of the stolen items. Morrison studied the financial intelligence reports with growing alarm. The sophistication and funding behind Operation Crown Jewel suggested involvement by individuals with enormous resources and international connections. This wasn't just criminal activity. It was a coordinated effort to obtain historical information that could be used for political purposes. Sir, Detective Sergeant Chen approached with additional forensic reports. We've completed our analysis of the electronic equipment recovered from the assault team. What we found is extremely concerning. Morrison accepted the technical reports, noting the complexity of the equipment that had been used in the palace break-in. What did you discover, Chen? The electronic devices included sophisticated communication equipment that was being used to transmit real-time copies of documents to external receivers. Even if we had failed to stop the theft, the criminals' employers would have obtained digital copies of everything they stole. Morrison felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications. Are you saying that someone already has copies of these historical documents, even though we recovered the originals? That's a possibility we have to consider, sir. The transmission logs show multiple data uploads during the time Ashford was in the Blue Drawing Room, including what appears to be photographic documentation of Princess Charlotte's letters. Commander Whitfield spoke grimly. Morrison, we may have prevented the physical theft, but we might not have prevented the information from reaching the people who commissioned this operation. Morrison spent the next several hours coordinating with intelligence agencies to track the digital transmissions and identify their recipients. What they discovered painted a picture of international intrigue that extended far beyond typical criminal activity. The electronic trail led to servers in multiple countries, eventually connecting to a network of individuals who specialized in collecting compromising historical information about European royal families. These weren't academic researchers or legitimate historians. They were political operatives and wealthy collectors who traded in secrets that could be used for blackmail or political manipulation. Sir, Chen reported after completing her digital forensics analysis, we've identified at least 3 different recipients of the transmitted documents. One appears to be connected to a Russian oligarch with known anti-British political activities. Another traces to a Swiss banking consortium. And the third leads to what appears to be a private intelligence organization based in Monaco. Morrison understood that they were dealing with a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of international politics and finance. The theft of royal historical documents wasn't just about money. It was about obtaining leverage that could be used against the British government and monarchy. Dr. Sinclair returned to provide additional analysis of Princess Charlotte's letters that made the situation even more complex. Inspector, I've completed my detailed examination of the correspondence, and what Princess Charlotte discovered about royal genealogy is even more significant than we initially realized. Morrison returned his attention to the historical documents, knowing that understanding their content was crucial to comprehending the full scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered. Princess Charlotte's investigation revealed that King George III, her grandfather, had secretly recognized several children from relationships that were not officially acknowledged by the royal court. More importantly, she found evidence that some of these unrecognized children had legitimate claims to the throne that were superior to the official line of succession. Morrison felt the implications washing over him like a cold wave. Dr. Sinclair, are you saying that the current royal family might not be the legitimate heirs to the British throne? That's one possible interpretation of Princess Charlotte's findings, Inspector. However, it's important to note that royal succession is determined by law and parliamentary recognition, not just genealogical legitimacy. Even if these documents prove that other individuals had superior hereditary claims, it wouldn't automatically invalidate the current monarchy. Commander Whitfield interrupted with additional intelligence that complicated the situation further. Morrison, we've received word from our international partners that similar operations targeting royal archives have been conducted in Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands over the past 2 years. It appears that someone is systematically gathering compromising historical information about European monarchies. Morrison began to see the broader pattern of what they had uncovered. Ma'am, it sounds like we've discovered an international conspiracy to destabilize European monarchies by exposing historical irregularities that could be used to question their legitimacy. That's exactly what we believe, Inspector. The individuals behind this conspiracy appear to have significant financial resources and political motivations that extend far beyond criminal profit. As Morrison processed the scope of what they had discovered, he received an urgent call from Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla's private secretary was requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the recovered documents and their implications for the royal family. When Morrison arrived at the palace later that afternoon, he found an atmosphere of controlled tension that was very different from the chaos of the previous evening. Elizabeth Hartwell met him with an expression of deep concern that went beyond the immediate crisis they had just survived. Inspector Morrison, Her Majesty has been briefed on the preliminary findings regarding Princess Charlotte's letters, and she has asked to speak with you personally about their implications. Morrison was escorted to Queen Camilla's private study, where he found her examining copies of the recovered documents under the guidance of royal historians and legal advisors. Her expression carried the weight of someone grappling with revelations that could fundamentally alter her family's legacy. Inspector Morrison, I want to thank you and your team for preventing what could have been a catastrophic theft, Queen Camilla began. However, I understand that what you've discovered raises questions that go far beyond simple criminal activity. Morrison chose his words carefully, knowing that he was addressing concerns that touched the very foundation of the British constitutional system. Your Majesty, the documents we recovered do contain historical information that certain individuals clearly considered extremely valuable. However, I want to emphasize that historical documents must be evaluated within their proper context. Inspector, I'm less concerned about historical interpretations than I am about how these documents might be used by those who wish to damage the monarchy. If copies of Princess Charlotte's letters are already in the hands of hostile individuals, we need to understand what we might be facing. Morrison had been anticipating this question and had prepared his response carefully. Your Majesty, our intelligence analysis suggests that the individuals behind this conspiracy are primarily interested in using historical documents as leverage for political or financial gain, rather than pursuing legitimate historical research. Queen Camilla considered his response thoughtfully. Inspector, there's something I need to tell you about Princess Charlotte's letters that might help you understand why they were specifically targeted. Morrison waited as Queen Camilla gathered her thoughts, sensing that she was about to reveal information that had been closely guarded for generations. Princess Charlotte wasn't just investigating royal genealogy out of academic curiosity. She had discovered that certain powerful families in Europe were planning to use irregularities in royal succession to advance their own political ambitions. Her letters were essentially intelligence reports about a conspiracy against the British monarchy that existed over 200 years ago. Morrison felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Your Majesty, are you suggesting that what we've discovered is a modern continuation of a historical conspiracy that Princess Charlotte uncovered in the 19th century? The same families and political interests that threatened the monarchy in Princess Charlotte's time have continued their activities across multiple generations. What your investigation has uncovered isn't just criminal theft. It's evidence of a centuries-long campaign against the stability of the British constitutional system. As Morrison absorbed this revelation, he realized that Operation Crown Jewel represented far more than an ambitious criminal enterprise. They had uncovered evidence of a multi-generational conspiracy that combined historical manipulation, political intrigue, and modern criminal methods to achieve objectives that had been pursued for centuries. The investigation that had begun with a missing tiara had revealed secrets about the British monarchy that would require the highest levels of government to address. Morrison understood that his role had evolved from investigating theft to protecting national security interests that reached to the very heart of British constitutional democracy. As he prepared to brief his superiors on the full scope of what they had discovered, Morrison reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. What had started as a routine investigation had become one of the most significant law enforcement cases in modern British history, with implications that would be felt for generations to come. The Royal Guard, who had discovered the truth about Operation Crown Jewel, had not just solved a criminal case. He had uncovered evidence of a historical conspiracy that challenged fundamental assumptions about power, legitimacy, and the nature of democratic institutions in the modern world.